right, welcome back to another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. I'm Steven.
I'm Luke.
It's been a hot minute since we've been in front of the mic. We would need to apologize to all our regular listeners who may have left us some feedback saying we weren't on our regular schedule. But, you know, it's winter. It's been snowy and cold. The bees are just doing their thing in the hive, okay? There's just not that much to do.
And hopefully surviving. Hopefully the thing is surviving in the hive.
I mean, I was around my yard briefly back on the 1st of February when it was sunny and 60 degrees and the girls were flying. So I did crack some lids and look and peek.
Yeah.
It wasn't the worst. It wasn't the best. I think I had 5 hives going into last winter. One of those was a double 6/6 styrofoam that was the leftovers of the October cutouts we did. So I threw them together as much as possible with as much honey that I could round up that we scavenged, with an understanding that this is likely not to make it, and sure enough, they haven't.
Yeah, that was the one that we had the queens.
Yeah.
And they died. Like, I had caged the queen, and
Yep.
I set her on that ledge where they had treated,
Yep.
and it died. She
Yep.
died, like, within minutes.
But we had 2 other cutouts, and one of those had a good queen, and then it seemed like a lot of them didn't stick around with that queen, but then I had a bunch stick around for the other one, and I just did my best to try to get
figure something out.
A football-sized clump of bees together in a small 6/6 with some frames, and
that late in the season, it's hard to keep them alive.
I did the best I could. We knew that it wasn't going to have a high success rate, so you count that one as a likely not to survive. I think I had a weak one that after fall treatments I was like, you guys, I don't think are going to make it. So, but the other 3 I had good confidence in, and as of February 1st they were still alive.
Good.
So I know you were out of town. We're going to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
And
yeah.
Didn't have an opportunity to peek at a bunch of yours, but got some video.
Happens every year. Every year that I'm out of town, there's nice weather, and then I don't get to see my bees.
But, you know, we're back this week. We're back to single-digit lows and teens for highs for the week. So we're having another good solid deep freeze after warming up to be in 30s and 40s. So we're still not out of winter here.
Yeah, if it would just stick to 30s and 40s, that'd be so nice.
I mean, we had a couple of days where we had some 25-degree days and some snow. Where the low was 25.
Yeah.
And the high was 30, 32. And that's, a little snow, an inch here or there.
Okay. Yeah.
Just give you enough whiff of winter to remind you that there is winter.
Yep.
That's good. But, when it's 5 below and the wind's out of the west at like 15 mile an hour, man, it's no fun.
No.
Somebody else can have that. But here's where we are in the Midwest. Let's see. We had a beginner beekeepers class. It was pretty sparse.
Well, hold on. I was out of town. I got to talk about the Apis Melapona.
Oh, you going to talk about Mexico first?
Let's talk about a little bit of Mexico.
Okay.
So I went down to Mexico, and I worked with the Mayans down there. I've actually got a video of getting to the hives. We drive off onto a dirt road. It's a good thing I trust the guys, because they took me in the pickup truck. We drove off onto the dirt road down into the jungle. And then and you stop in the middle of this other dirt road in the jungle, and then you walk onto a deer path for about 100 yards into the jungle.
So what you're saying is we're never going to find you.
You would never find me again.
Yeah, okay.
No, I'd be
all right. Well, that's a thing.
And I got to work their bees, and they have a big issue with small hive beetle. And so
because it's in the shade, or
because it's in the jungle. Because you're in like a cutout in a jungle.
Yeah.
And they're just like every single hive that you took out. Like, now, was there hundreds of them there? No, but there was like 50 or 60 of them, and in strong hives. So
I don't suppose they have a lot of access to dryer sheets, do they?
No access to dryer sheets, no treatment for them, and they do have to put all of the feet. So the hive stands look remarkably like our hive stands.
Yeah.
As far as what Steve and I use is kind of like deck boards that are long deck boards that are parallel to each other, and they usually have 4 feet, and then you set the hives across those. They only had 4 hives each, so we only got to go through 4 hives there. And they are Africanized.
So when you say go through, you put suit on, suit and gloves, smoker.
Yeah, suit and gloves, smoker, So
you crack lids and move frames around.
I cracked lids and looked for eggs, and they really wanted to show me the queen. And when you smoke, and one of them's really not real fond of it. He's afraid of his bees. So he had the smoker, and he was smoking. They wanted to make
Very
sure,
aggressive with the smoker.
Yeah, they did not want me to get stung. And I told them, my Spanish isn't great, but I told them, it's okay. I've been stung before. I'll be stung again. This is not an issue. And so it's not Apis mellifera. It's what? It's Apis. So the ones we were going through, those are Apis mellifera.
Oh, okay.
So those are what they actually produce most of their honey off of. The Apis melapona are also in town. Those are a little tiny. I got videos of them this time. They look like a little wasp. We were talking, right?
Yeah.
Wasp-looking little guys.
So did you get to work those?
You can't really work those.
They don't keep them in.
They don't keep them in boxes.
In like a
keep 'em in
Langstroth
logs.
hive?
No, they keep them in logs that have it's a hollowed out log. And when I say hollowed out log, I would say 6 to 8 inches in diameter. That's hollowed out, and you have an end, a hole on the end of it that has a closed off thing.
They won't accept Langstroth?
They don't accept a Langstroth, and they don't build comb that way.
Oh.
They build imagine mushrooms growing on top of each other. They're cups that they build. They build little cups.
Yeah.
And they sit on top of each other, and that's their hive. And so, when they have larvae, it's like a little cup that has little cells in it. So that
and they make honey?
And they make honey. They make about a liter of honey a year.
It's not a lot of honey.
It's not, and it's not if I gave it to you, you'd be like, "That's honey," but that's not honey. That's not quite right.
Interesting.
So it's a different consistency. It's a different flavor. It's a different as far as the Mayan culture is concerned, because these guys are direct descendants of Mayans. They can trace their family lineage all the way back there. It's technically a medicine, and it has some spirituality tie-ins. So, they're very important to them, but because they don't produce honey, a lot of them they don't manage those bees.
And so, we're going to touch on this a little later in the podcast, but to get ahead of ourselves a little early, do you think that they see an impact of bringing in Apis mellifera and how that impacts the ecosystem with the native bee down there?
I can't see how they would. There are so.
I mean, it's jungle.
It is jungle, and it is on the edge of the road, off the edge of the road. 3 inches is you better have a machete to cut through the jungle if you're going to someplace in there, and all the sides of the roads are 6 feet tall, all the way for miles of this flower called the tahonal flower, and it's a real green tasting flower. I brought honey back again this year. It is not tahonal honey because we were too early for it this year. And so this honey tastes remarkably like Midwest honey. It's palm honey is what they called it.
Really?
So yeah, it tastes a lot like clover-ish, along that vein of honey. So not the tropical flavors that you normally get with that kind of honey. So not very green.
So at least one data point to suggest that they're happy to live together, and they're gonna play in their own sandboxes.
Yeah, and my goal there with them, I'm trying to talk them into doing it, and then I found schematics for it is a hut that you can put boxes of this Apis Melapona in, and there's actual different size boxes that you put them in, and it's an empty box because they won't build the frames, right?
Yeah.
So it's an empty box, and they're really swarmy. So their main defense is if you mess with me too much, I just swarm and I leave. So anyway, I'm trying to talk them into doing that to extract the honey, right? We think we have all this extractors and stuff. They use a syringe, and syringe it out of these little cups. It's just a totally different animal.
So I suppose they used straws back in the day. I guess
I would guess so. Straws or reeds,
or
you could probably pull the little. If you cut and pulled the little cups off, you could probably get away with doing that too. But everything's in cups: pollen, honey, all of it's in cups.
So we had our annual beginner beekeepers class, and it was slightly attended. We've certainly had much better attended versions in the past. I don't know if that's sort of an indication of where the beekeeping hobby is going to be for 2025.
Well, beekeeping's hard too.
Yeah, we've certainly had a boom in our previous beekeeping beginner classes in the past. We also had our club meeting where we had a local farmer who's about an hour south of us, has been, I think he's second or third generation farmer, row crops.
At least second, because he talked about his parents.
He talked about his parents and parents' land that he works. He's on the river, so the photos that he was showing us during his presentation, you could see the river in the background. So his when we say his cropland was up against the river, I mean it's literally adjacent to the flowing river, Illinois River.
It's as close as my bees are, I think.
Yeah.
Some of it is. So mine are right off the river as well.
And he was there to talk about pollinator habitat, and he had some ideas starting. I think his presentation started in 2011 or 12 or something.
Yeah.
I didn't bring my notes from the class.
Yeah,
and
around that time frame.
He had this idea that you could take an aerial crop duster and put clover seed in it and crop dust clover seed into standing corn in August. And the seed just falls out of the airplane down onto the corn, migrates through the corn because the corn doesn't really hold it up, lands on the ground. It gets rained on by Mother Nature because he was saying as a farmer we typically get rain toward the 1st of September. And it established itself. They come in, they harvest the corn like they normally would. When you harvest corn, all of the not kernel gets chopped up and spit out the back of the combine, and so they call that what do they call that? It's the
I don't know. I think I was late to this, and so I missed the beginning, the very intro of what you're talking about. So it's nice to get a recap of it.
So all the husks and everything are on the ground, and the clover just kind of overwinters. It's able to withstand the freeze-thaw cycles, and it pushes itself up through all of the corn residue. That's the word I was looking for, corn residue. And in the spring, it forms a mat of clover on top of his farmland. And he had some other reasons for doing that initially. He thought he could get some free nitrogen fixing it. Turns out he's probably not able to get a real big bump from that for some interesting reasons that don't have to do with beekeeping.
No.
But the reason why he was there is because he realized that if he adjusted the flavors of clover, because there's like a dozen different flavors of clover, that he could produce a flowering clover crop about a month. He's looking for 28 to 30 days of flowering clover before. So he'll plant his corn,
and he's looking for this for assistance with pollinators.
Yeah,
and just to do across the board assistance, which is a huge shift in concept for me for most farmers. But yeah,
because there's. In our previous administrations, the government had been supporting programs that were trying to be supportive of pollinators, pollinator habitat, developing pollinator habitat, working some of the program he was doing. He was getting a natural erosion benefit from the clover because of his sandy
main
soil.
Reason that he said that he was doing it was the amount of erosion that he got off his fields.
And he also got he did a breakdown. He was getting dollars, matching grant dollars from a number of different programs, state and federal programs. One wasn't for erosion. One of them was for one of the weeds.
One of them was for pollinator combat. One of them was for watercress.
Yeah.
reduction. I think it was watercress. Is what it's called. Water something like that.
I thought it was one of the other ones. There was weed suppression that they're trying to control without having to put more chemical on. And so he was seeing that the clover was helping suppress the weed naturally. And so he comes in the spring and he node drill tills the corn directly into the patch of clover. And what that does is that he wants to make sure he doesn't have a competing crop that's competing for nutrients and water and sunlight by a certain phase of corn development. And it's something about V3, V4, I think is what he said, V4, V5, which has to do with corn development and leaves and all that kind of stuff. But that period of time is a calendar day. And if he gets about 28 to 30 days of blooming time before he has to come in and kill off the clover with a chemical, then he is able to have about a month period of time there where he's got blooming clover that is perfect for all the pollinators. He's like, I got all kinds of pollinators. It's not just honeybees. It's across the gambit for pollinators. He had some video that was very active in the fields.
Yeah, it was really neat. It was a really interesting presentation.
So I was surprised at the cost. It appeared to be as much as $10 to $15 an acre in cost, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that he was covering like 400 acres of clover every spring, and that's just tilled in, right? And so he was getting a lot of that subsidy covered through the various programs he was using.
Well, he got all of the subsidy for the cost for the clover covered.
Yeah.
Plus, he got a benefit per acre for the corn or soy that he was putting in.
Yeah. So if you're another row crop farmer out there and you want to know more about it, reach out to us. We can put you in contact. He's been working this system he's developing on his own. This has been in... He said he tried to reach out to the ag extension with Illinois Ag and the university, and been real disappointed with lack of feedback there because he thought that there was some real benefit for research that could be done in trying to roll out a system like this for positive benefits across a wide range, soil health, erosion, weed control, nutrient levels,
biodiversity,
well as, and then on top of that, probably the most noticeable benefit is the pollinator habitat for, albeit a short period of time, right? This isn't full-time CRP ground that's pollinator habitat all year, but at least it's a month of better blooming clover for pollinators.
Well, and it's 30 days
in spring
of a clover crop that's just not going to be there otherwise, right? It's bare ground otherwise.
So that was really interesting to hear him talk about. So I don't know what other speakers we're going to have coming up for our other.
I'm the next speaker, actually.
Oh, are you? Are you? I thought we were going to try to have some other.
I want to get some other speakers in there, but they have me penciled in as the next speaker for the North American Honeybee Expo and my experience there.
Awesome.
So that's what I'll be talking about. People I've seen and met and things like that.
Speaking of speakers, our main segment for the show this week is going to be Everett Hendrixon.
Yep.
He was kind enough to join us on a call where we talked a bunch about the Dalan Animal Clinic, who has been developing the AFB vaccine, which we also talked about how it's going to have some carryover probably for EFB and deformed wing virus, although on the official release right now is AFB only, but there are strong signs that it's going to have positive benefits for a number of other problematic items that we're currently dealing with in the hive, and it's just a matter of getting those certified. So,
and it's a new approach to beekeeping, right? It's another tool that you can use in your arsenal to help with keeping our bees alive and healthy. All right, so today we have a first time of our we're doing a Zoom interview. So Everett Hendrixon, I met you by reaching out to Dalan Animal Clinic because of the vaccination I was really interested in. I read an article in the American Bee Journal about it, and so I was really interested in talking to you. So for the first time, we're going to have a remote, extended table podcast person here.
Special guest.
Special guest.
Special guest by remote.
There you go. So welcome. Thank you for joining us here, being a beekeeping buddy with us. We're happy to have you. So we got some questions for you. We got a lot of questions for you. We'll probably get through some of them, and then, but before we get too far in there, let's talk about actually the Dalan Animal Clinic. So let's talk about your guys' mission overall.
So Dalan Animal Health, as you'll see, our motto is healthy animals, healthy planet. And so the mission behind Dalan is really to increase the health of the animal world, primarily through invertebrates. And so some technology that was discovered by our three founders, Francie, Daliel, and Annette, and that's how we get Dalan, is Daliel and Annette, that put together. That's where we get our name.
All right.
Daliel had found a pathway that was for innate immunity in invertebrates, that you could actually train the immune system in some respects. And that was just never thought of before. And frankly, we haven't looked at, as a society, we haven't looked at invertebrate health that closely. And that gets involved. We have the honeybee track because honeybees is the largest critical component to food security on an invertebrate level. And so the vaccine for American foulbrood was developed and designed over the last 8 years and brought to market in the U.S. About 2.5 years ago. And so we've been on the market. We have a conditional license. We still have a lot of things to prove, and we're excited to be doing that and working in this market and helping out bees and beekeepers at a fundamental level, no different than you would cattle or chickens or pigs, with vaccinations or any medications that are for preventative methods of disease control.
So this is only in the U.S.?
So we're in the U.S. and Canada.
Okay.
Those are our conditional licenses. We have other countries that we will be rolling out. We hope to see Europe online before too long, and then there's other countries overseas that our head of global development deals with all that. But we have, I would say for those that want to, they can tune into our website or our newsletter, and they can follow which countries are going to be next to release a vaccine in that area.
That tails nicely into our next question, which was sort of what inspired development of our first bee vaccine. Is this the first bee vaccine? I guess it is.
Yep, it sure is. And it's let's just get this word vaccine cleared up real quick.
Yeah.
So in modern times, recent times, we've thought of vaccinations as messing with DNA, RNA, different things that with the pandemic that really just kind of unwound a lot of thoughts and feelings about vaccination. All this is dead bacteria in an aqueous solution. So dead bacteria in water. That's all it is. It is not, how do I want to say? It's not GMO. There's no chemicals. There's no preservatives that are trying to keep it in stasis. There's no issues with genetic modification. And so when you probably ask a question down the line about why doesn't it just keep, perpetuating throughout the generations once you vaccinate the first queen, because we're not doing anything to the DNA. And so this is just a trigger to the immune system to allow the bee to tell her brood, basically, through her immune system and through her ovaries, that you need to be watching out for these things.
I mean, that's a lot like, we did an episode several back where we talked about how some of the basic fundamental bee immune system works, and it's fundamentally a lot different than ours, right? They don't have white blood cells and things like that, but a lot of how the vaccine works in terms of, for us, right? Like we have to keep getting a flu shot. We have to keep getting, mumps or measles. Every kid needs to get that because it's not genetically encoded into us either. We have to be exposed to that. And it's, the same, what you just said, right? It's the same thing. We have to expose each one of those to the vaccine that's going to prompt them to know, hey, this is bad. And like you said, look out for it.
Well, it develops the immune system in their gut, which is where a lot of that immune system is, from what I understand. Right? Is that where we're?
So, yeah, I mean, transgenerational immune priming is the mechanism, and if anybody wants to do research, there's a lot of research that's been published on transgenerational immune priming over the last 8 years or less, and this product, the AFB vaccine, uses that pathway. And so the way the pathway works in bees, now not all invertebrates are like bees, but
right.
The way it works in bees is you get this vaccine into queen candy, into a food source. The attendants that are the nurse bees that will attend to the queen, they take it into their system, that gets into their midgut, that then goes to their fat bodies and into their glands, that then produces the royal jelly. Royal jelly gets fed to the queen, and it's kind of the same path. It goes into her midgut, into her fat bodies, and from there, it goes into the ovaries. And once we get into the ovaries, that pathway is now complete. That transgenerational immune priming has been triggered. And so initially, for American foul brood is what we were obviously licensed for and still are. But the process of doing that with this bacteria has shown us that it triggers defense among other things, including viruses. So there's a lot that we're still learning on this. The label is for American foul brood. I don't want to mislead anybody. We're going to talk about deformed wing virus and a few other things probably, but that is the label. And it is done through that rearing of the queen mechanism after she's mated.
Now, we don't see a lot of AFB, but we do have EFB in our area. I've had EFB in my apiary in the past, so I've personally seen it and dealt with it. Our state, Illinois, is lucky enough to have state inspectors, so we've had them come out and look. And one of my students last year lost her 3 hives to EFB that showed up out of the blue. And so you're thinking that this same treatment will also be effective for the EFB?
So that the jury is still out on the EFB with this vaccine. There's also, if you go on our website, you'll see that there is a separate EFB vaccine in R&D that is being worked on. So how these things wind up, who gets to the finish line first, we'll see. EFB is prolific in the U.S., especially in things like blueberries and cranberries in hot, humid areas, or just humid areas, period. Anytime you get moisture, anytime you get, I just want to say this monocropping thing that we like to do to provide, massive amounts of food for people, EFB tends to really, explode in those situations. So we know EFB is an issue. Globally, AFB is a much larger issue when it comes to the monetary value of a hive because countries, a lot of countries, and we have it even here in the States, where if you have an outbreak of AFB, you have to burn your hive. That's the only way to get rid of it. In most states, that's the law, that if you're found to have AFB, you will burn. Now, in some countries, if you even have the presence of AFB, they burn your whole they burn your whole apiary. The presence of AFB is in at least 50% of the hives in U.S. and Canada. It's at a subclinical level. You don't see outbreaks. You don't see the strings or the goo or the stink, but it's there, and it's just waiting for an opportunity to regenerate.
And by there you mean the bacteria is present.
Correct. The spores, maybe they're dormant. But whatever the case may be, those spores are in the hive. They're in the honey. You can go to Canada and they're doing honey tests to find, they can pull it off the shelf and give you a report of what is your AFB level in your apiary. It's really cool. But if I'm in a different type of legislative environment and someone says, oh, you've got AFB in your honey, okay, we're burning your whole apiary. That's tragic. And that the value behind that is extremely large. So yes, to your point, AFB to date hasn't been as big an issue as it was, say, 30 years ago before mites came into the picture. AFB was a big problem before that, and then before the antibiotics were used to counteract it. EFB is a continual problem. Sac brood is kind of in that same family when we see it. Some people confuse EFB with sac brood and vice versa. So we're working on it. And that's a really long answer. I'm sorry if it's going to make your time go over here.
No, you're all right.
We got plenty of time.
Yeah. Yep. We also have questions. So, as you mentioned, right, we're going to eventually get to deformed wing virus, and I'm interested in. I think your preliminary studies, which are still being done, showed a potential impact on deformed wing virus loads as well. And I'm choosing that word real specific, deformed wing virus load, right? Because the amount of virus in the bee is usually whether or not is it expressed into the bee phenology, right? If you actually have crinkled wings, like bees have lots of viruses in them. We know that, right? And so once you get the crinkly wing portion of it, that means they've had enough of it in them that they can't fight it off, and it actually changes their usually very short, tragic life, right? They can't fly. They kind of wander around aimlessly, listlessly, and then they die. And usually your hive collapses soon after that, just because that means that virus is everywhere. And as you mentioned before, those mites will happily spread that virus. You know, they don't do it on purpose, but they still do it. So that's a really long question on, hey, does this work for deformed wing virus yet or not?
Yeah, so just to kind of back up a little bit and talk about a conditional license and what it means.
Sure.
It means that we are told by the regulatory agencies, in this case USDA primarily, we got to prove that we don't do any harm. And so to do that, we have to do massive amounts of field testing and field studies. And in that process, we're looking at what could go wrong. You know, are there any unintended consequences to what we're doing? But we're also looking at, are there any other benefits too? And so, oddly enough, trying to do an EFB field study, we sent a massive amount of hive samples off for testing for a full panel, and we were looking at the EFB. What disappointed us when it came back is there was no EFB in the entire apiary, not in the controls, not in the vaccinated. So there's no, did it work, did it not, who knows? But, oh, by the way, you have these very large numbers of suppression in deformed wing virus. And we're talking on average close to 90%, somewhere between 83 and 92%.
That's huge.
So that sounds like kind of like the happy accident of how Viagra came to existence, right? Blood pressure medicine. And by the way, everybody was reporting the side effect that we end up marketing as the side effect portion and sort of ignore its original blood pressure implication.
Right. And I'll also say AFB is becoming more and more of a problem in the U.S. again. We see it in Maine. We see it in Massachusetts. We've seen it in Wyoming, in Colorado. We are seeing isolated pockets of AFB start to represent themselves again. And I think that's really, just Everettology is what I call it, my opinion only, is the reduced use of antibiotics. And so we know that antibiotics are not supposed to be used as a preventative, though a lot of beekeepers will do so. And once the veterinarians had the VFD that they, the VFD was required to gain access to antibiotics, fewer people started using them. And as fewer people start using, you'll start to see pockets of AFB pop up again.
Yeah, and I think that's more on a commercial level. Hobbyists, I've met very few hobbyists that, one, know how to apply, right?
Yeah.
How to apply that antibiotic, and two, actually have access to it. Steve and I do have access to it just because Steve has a hobby farm, so
Yeah,
he's got a vet.
I had a long-standing relationship with my large animal vet prior to – he knew I kept bees, and then I tested positive for EFB, and I was able to show him my pink paper, and I said, are you able to provide the antibiotic? And he's like, I have it. We use it for cows. He's like, so I can provide it, but you'll have to do your own sort of research in what the proper application is for your hives, because he's like, I don't really know
number of moles per dose. Chemistry stuff.
So like technically, I used it for the 1 year to try to see if it was effective in treating my hives, and the short story there was it's sort of mirrors a lot of the stories from our state inspector, which is, yes, I treated. Yes, the hives got better, but then they seemed to get worse, weeks or months later, and they never really fully healed out of it. And the short story was eventually those hives collapsed within a year or so. And how I got, quote unquote, rid of my EFB was those hives died out and I replaced that wooden wire, right? So I didn't burn it, but at the same time, I wasn't able to effectively not keep the bees around and deal with my problem, which was why the idea of something like a vaccine seems like a much better solution for now, understanding that it's not going to help. Like, I can't just sprinkle some of your vaccine on my hive and make it all go away, right? Like, you have to start with a treated queen for this to be effective, right? So that's the other thing we need to make clear to everybody listening, that this is not like after you've gotten your cold or your flu, you can go and get a shot and you won't get it next time. Like, once the bees have it, I don't know that your vaccine that I'm going to give to a queen is going to be useful for that hive, correct?
Yes and no. It's useful to the apiary, because if I know I have an outbreak of deformed wing virus, and there's so much to talk about when we talk about these viruses and the bacterias. With deformed wing virus, if you have crippled wing, story's over. You're done. If you see that crippled wing, there's a lot that happens before you see that crippled wing, and your hive could be, quote unquote, what they call functionally dead before you see it, meaning that the bees don't make it to the lifespan they need to be foragers. And so what we talk about is subclinical levels. And there's a paper that we have as well about the subclinical levels of AFB, American foul brood, and what that does to a hive. And with deformed wing virus, what we've seen, and what we've seen especially with some southern apiarists that would say, hey, I had a tremendous problem with DWV. I need to bring this in to help clean up my hive. And so with new splits, with new hives, they can cycle out the viruses. That's their intent. We'll see if they can or not. Cycle out the viruses by suppressing the loads, and suppressing rather than suppressing the loads, suppressing the bees' susceptibility to those loads.
So you've mentioned, I got a quick question. You've mentioned bees in Florida and now and Maine and all over the U.S. How many of these hives in your clinical trials, just to give people a sense, how many hives have you tested this? Has Dalan, not you, but how many hives
that's a great question. I want to say that our tested hives is over 20,000.
Okay. So you're not talking about like 100 or 200. You're talking in the thousands.
Yeah. The one field study we're talking about with deformed wing virus was a 400 hive study, but now we went and replicated that several times over this year in different areas of the U.S. and Canada. And so what you have to realize is, we're not just looking at a few number of hives.
Right.
We really are wanting to know, is there anything negative that could come of this? And over the last 8 years, we haven't seen it yet, but we're still looking. And what are the benefits? Because at the end of the day, I can tell you that Dalan's product suppresses disease, but what does that mean in value?
Yeah, so that's one of my questions. That's one of my next questions, right? What happens? You have a healthier hive, in my mind, you're making more honey.
So within 45 days, you should see, if you're taking apples and apples, a vaccinated queen from Joe apiarist versus an unvaccinated queen from the same source, the same genetic line, you should see faster brood buildup. So within 45 days, you should see that the vaccinated queen, her brood is developing quicker. That typically leads to quicker honey production. You're going to notice that her brood patterns are better, that her clusters are nicer, and that it's just a healthier, more robust hive.
Okay.
And so what we hear across the board with a lot of other beekeepers is they just look more balanced. And so where do you put the value on quote unquote balance? And again, this is an observational gut tool that these beekeepers are telling us about, commercial beekeepers. And that is really when it comes down to is if we're producing more brood to the tune of a frame over a year's time, well, that's $30. A frame of brood is typically valued in that neighborhood, whether it's, 25 to $50. Well, I would think a frame of brood is pretty simple to get to. It could be more than that. It could be 2 or 3 frames. More honey. If I'm a honey producer and I'm getting 12 or 15% more honey, then isn't that awesome? If the price is right, then I can sell it and make a profit. If I'm a pollinator, I have hives that can take the rigors of a pollination cycle better, then I can do more splits and have more bees ready for next year, and I can send those to my pollination accounts, and I can grow my operation. Sure. So there's a lot of different benefits for a lot of different beekeepers. Now, if I'm a hobbyist, we pour a lot of, what I want to say, emotional value into our hives, right? We pour a lot of money into them as well. And so to lose a hive for whatever reason, whether it swarms or whether it gets a disease and collapses, is heartbreaking. And we work really hard at trying to keep our hives and doing the best we can for our bees. And so this mitigates some of that loss and some of the pressures that you have to deal with. And if you're not an expert at disease control, a vaccinated queen to me or a package or a nuke makes complete sense, because if I'm not paying attention to disease, this helps me to at least sleep better at night. In that sense.
Well, and the thing that we don't talk about is that in order diseases and viruses and things, when you suppress them, right, or eliminate them, right, we don't talk about polio anymore because we've gotten rid of polio, right? So we if we can do that with the same, if we can do that again with AFB or EFB or things like that, then that's great.
Yeah. Right. And up to a gentleman in Maine that they've had a few pockets of AFB. He calls me up. He's like, I've got 5 Apis hives. If I burn these things, I'm losing a few thousand.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I don't know how that works with styrofoam hives and all the rest of it, but if you burn these hives that are, 3, 4, 5 times the value of a woodenware, it gets pretty dicey pretty quick.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely.
Once you've got that vaccinated queen, are we saying that vaccine is good for the life of the queen? Basically, how long does the vaccine provide protection?
So as far as we know, it's the life of the queen. We have some longer-term studies still underway, and in Europe, that's a big deal. And so we have those studies underway, but we know at least for a season. So the typical requeening procedure in commercial apiculture in the U.S. is they requeen once a year. Some do it more than that, but that's a good cycle for these vaccinated queens. Will they do 2-3 years? That's what we're looking to know. And some of this overwintering data that we're anxious to get back over the next few weeks will help us to understand the longevity of this queen and her vaccination process.
So if the primary way that we spread the vaccine throughout the hive is through the worker development of the royal jelly, does that mean my second generation queen that's fed only vaccinated royal jelly is also going to carry on a vaccine component to it, a protection component?
If they're feeded vaccinated royal jelly, what you got to understand is once her immune system's triggered in her ovaries, we quit administering the vaccine.
Oh, okay.
There's no exposure to the next generation. The immune system's triggered, and therefore they're protected. And the daughter queens have that same protection. What they don't have is the exposure level to then make that trigger pathway happen again.
Got it.
And this takes me back to the beginning of our conversation, wherein we're not altering DNA. So we're not changing how the bee is communicating. We're simply taking advantage of what's already there naturally. We're concentrating the bacteria into a food so that she can communicate that to her brood. Her daughter queens are not able to make that same communication because the royal jelly that her workers are now making don't have that exposure to the vaccine.
So that leads into the next question, which is sort of our application and how do we actually use, like if I buy a product from you, we've been struggling to come across actual good, how do you actually move from the product you ship me to an actual vaccinated hive? And
and for total clarity, we should point out that we are buying. We are. Yeah. I am. Yeah, we've officially agreed to buy product from you. Right? Yeah. So this, and you're not giving us product. This is not a paid advertisement, right? We're just. This is something that we're interested in and we're going to try out. And so I just want to make sure that our view listeners don't go.
Well, we talked about it. No. We talked about it in the past on our episodes that we had committed to purchasing and buying and getting a line of vaccinated colonies and queens that will be available in our area because we felt it was important. But with you here, getting some direct information on what's the best way that beekeepers to administer the vaccine in their apiary and how do we go about doing that?
It really depends on what you're doing in your apiary. If you're raising your own queens, you're grafting and you're mating, then you can consider the vaccine because that's really the most opportune time to do it. It is 50 doses for a vial, and that needs to all be used within 3 or 4 weeks once it's mixed into the candy. Now, if I have 10 hives or less, 15 hives, I want to try some vaccinated queens. We have several retail partners that are marketing vaccinated queens. And if you go to our website, we have those on our website that we know are using vaccinated stock from approved vaccinators that are raising, thousands upon thousands of queens, packages of nukes. And so you have a level of trust there. If you're talking to your local queen packaged nuke producer and he's like, oh, yeah, I have vaccinated stock, you can call us and ask, did they order the vaccine? But if we haven't audited the program to know how they're doing it or anything, all we can do is tell you whether they bought the vaccine or not.
Well, let's take a step back in that. So how do you actually apply that vaccine to the queen? Because, and it's a little bit of a leading question because I know some of the answer, but it's difficult to actually find online videos on how it's done. So can you walk us through how that's done?
So we alluded to it a little bit earlier. So you're taking the vaccine, you're going to mix it into queen candy, which is just a recipe of sugar and corn syrup, and you mix it in there with that, and then the label, as far as the label goes, you're going to take a queen, put her in a cage. 3 whole cages work the best, we found, for this portion, wherein you put the candy in there, you put the queen in there, you put some attendants in there, and you plug her up. And they will eat that candy over 7 days and feed that to her.
But you don't put her in a hive.
No, you're not putting her in a hive. You're actually isolating her.
Yeah, because nobody likes to take medicine.
That's right. Now, what a few savvy beekeepers have figured out, in which we've monitored it and it works, is they'll take queens and they'll put them in a battery box like JZBZ or whatever, and then they'll line them up. They'll put the attendants in the box, not in the cage. They'll put that ball of candy in the box. Ian Stepler has a video on YouTube about it. And this is a mass vax way of getting 50 or more queens vaccinated at one time. And then, they're ready to go to market. That system works. We've seen it work, I should say. By label, you're going to put it in the cage. You're going to put the attendants in the cage with her, and you're going to plug it up. Either way, you're going to be waiting for that queen to get this into her system for 7 days.
So if I'm a local club, per se, right, and I want to order some of this, and I need instructions on how to do this vaccination, does it come with a vial, or is this something that I call you for, or how does that work?
So instructions come with the vial. It comes with its own MSDS and all that. However, we have a beekeeper relations team that's just jam up. I tell you, this gal, Amy, that runs it, and we have some others that are involved, Nikki and Mark. Mark's also in sales with us. But they our beekeeper relations team will get with you, and I'll give you an example. There's a Queen Breeder Association, a small state. It's not a small state, but it's not the California guys. It's another state in the Ohio Valley. They have agreed as a club, as a Queen Breeder club, that they're going to get this they're going to pre-mix it, and they're going to give it out to members. I only want 5. I only want 15. Whatever the case is. And the membership has access to that vaccinated candy. Amy's walked them through that whole process. And so we have a way to work with individual beekeepers on their level and in their apiary to make sure this is seamless as possible.
That's great. That's great news.
Have you gotten any response from the beekeeping community as a large? And I know you touched on it briefly at the start. Were there any misconceptions that you'd like to address concerning the vaccine? We started off the show talking about how in today's political environment they can be a little touch and go there for a subject. But in terms of the overall beekeeping community, what's been your take?
So overall, the last when we first came to market, right on the heels of the pandemic, the vaccine was a very, very difficult word to get beyond. Now, we're not in that space anymore. People, we've been in the market long enough. People want to know what we're up to. I will say most of the concerns that we've heard is, does the vaccine get into the honey? And it does not. We've done the initial test, and we have the white paper if anybody needs to see it. On the honey, it's the moisture is the same. Everything's the same with honey, and there is no traces of the vaccine in the honey. We can't even get it into the royal jelly for the next generation, as we discussed earlier. So it's not getting into the honey. There haven't been any negative side effects that we've observed over the last 8 years. That doesn't mean that we have stopped observing. We are. So that usually are the two largest ones. Okay, what's the unintended consequence? Are you making my bee explode after 6 or 8 months? And we've had some more irrational claims about some things related to vaccination. A lot of that comes from the anti-vax community that aren't necessarily beekeepers in and of themselves. Most beekeepers are wary because they value the health of their bee, as they should be. But once they understand more about the pathway of transgenerational immune priming, that it's dead bacteria in water, that there's no chemicals, no preservatives, none of that stuff, they're more inclined to say, okay, it's for me or it's not for me, but it's not based on any inaccurate knowledge about what this is.
When you were at this point, do you have commercial partners you're working with that are implementing this across thousands of colonies? Are you able to speak to that?
I would say yes, at mostly hundreds of colonies. So we're still in, we find our innovators and we find our early adopters. And like anything in agriculture, and that's my background. I've been in crop, fruit and veg production and protection for quite some time. Any new product, and I advise some guys this, do you think I should do this on my apiary? And I'll say, well, how big is your apiary? Well, I get 10,000 hives. I need to do 5,000 vaccine doses. Based on what? What is the concern? And so with a lot of commercial producers, they always want to try something on a limited portion first. And then if things go well, they'll increase next year. If things go well, they'll increase next year. Because there is a cost of investment here. This isn't given away for free, as you mentioned earlier. So for me in my apiary, you can tell me what happens in Maine and in Wisconsin and in Alberta all you want, but I need to see it in my apiary. And so guys will bring it in typically in the hundreds to start with. And we have several apiaries that have been working with us now. This will be their third season purchasing vaccine, and they're increasing every year. Where we see the thousands is in that queen production. So if I'm a producer that's making queens nukes packages for Man Lake, for the bee supply, for Dayton, whoever, yes, they're producing it in the thousands, but it's for market. It's not necessarily for their own apiary. They are putting vaccine in their own apiary, but the thousands, as you mentioned before, really comes into that production cycle.
Since this is primarily a derivative of a bacteria in terms of how the vaccine's developed, is there any focus on other honeybee diseases that are bacteria based that we think you could transition this treatment to other diseases?
So if you go on our website, you'll see there's one in the pipeline for EFB, one in there for sac brood, one for chalk brood. Might those be blended in one case just for one vaccination? Probably. Yeah, I don't know. I might be speaking out of turn there. We just released some new information that went across the public media around the world about shrimp, and so diseases in shrimp and bacterial diseases there. We've identified and we've produced a vaccine that is most likely going to gain traction in that market. So we have a lot of different things moving. Our website's pretty transparent about that. And again, our R&D pipeline is very full. They only tell me what they are pretty confident that I won't mess up publicly, so they don't give me any top secret information. But for now, that's what I do know, that we have the EFB, chalk brood, sac brood in the pipeline. What I will say to that, and we have a study out of BC, Purnell, Dr. Purnell. He is working on something that won't be published or released until this time next year because he's doing an 18-month deal. But his preliminary findings were that those hives that were vaccinated had less chalk brood. And another one, and it's just escaping me. I don't think it was sac brood that he looked at. Maybe it was, but it was another brood disease. Not necessarily because the vaccine is directly suppressing those, but if I have a healthier hive, I don't get chalk brood. If I have a healthier hive, I'm less susceptible to sac brood. And so what we're seeing is there are some other disease benefits, but it might be more of a correlation, not a causation.
Yeah, that's what I think. It feels like a lot of the knock-on effects, once you take out something, right? Take out one of the detriments to almost any, we could talk about a hive, but anything, right? It's as you slowly pluck away things that are sapping away from the strength of any kind of colony or any kind of organization, you tend to have a stronger organization overall, right? And that's what really, like, bees are livestock, but they're really kind of an organization. So I really expect interesting follow-on effects to if this is as effective as we believe it is, then I'm really excited about the future of this. Do you have any? What's your vision for the next, say, 5 to 10 years in the beekeeping community? Do you believe this is the route going forward? Do you think that? Do you have a crystal ball of what's going to go happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
I have a lot of opinions.
Okay.
But what I don't have is a crystal ball or one that functions correctly. Let me say that. So I'm going to kind of put this in context, right? Because what we're seeing in the commercial industry is a huge redistribution. And what has become the norm for the last 15 years in beekeeping is now on its head. We've had some pretty significant losses in commercial beekeeping this season, especially as they went into almonds. We have the price pressure on almond pollination is more and more, so that's not as valuable to do these cross-country pollination events. Some operations really took it on the chin this year, and they lost 80-90% of their hives. I mean, it's catastrophic and it's heartbreaking. I think what we've seen in the industry 5 years going forward is a move back into more regional pollination cycles. So if I'm in the Midwest, in your area, I'm going to do some melons, I'm going to do some pumpkins, I'm going to do some cherries or apples or what have you, and I'm going to make enough money on my pollination that my honey production is just icing on the cake. Now, if the beekeeping industry can come together as a whole and really start to have strong representation, then we can probably have some effects on honey prices. In that environment, the vaccine for honeybees, this preventative way of providing hive health, and it's not just going to be vaccine. There's other products out there by other people that will benefit a hive in its building of its health profile. And some of those need to be proven. Some of those are still in their pipeline and in their discovery phases. But nonetheless, we're going to see, in my opinion, in my mind, Everettology says, we're going to see a big push toward preventative hive health, especially in mid-range operations, which will be broader than they are now. And by mid-range operations, I mean anywhere between 100 and 2,000 hives. And so those, what is typically called a sideliner size type of apiary right now, will become more of the norm because you go to Canada and that's what they have there now. You have 4,000 and 5,000 hive operations out there, and they run a viable business. And they do really well at it because they're able to control the health portion. When I have tens of thousands of hives, controlling my health becomes very difficult. I can't, as one person, ever do that, and I don't necessarily can train it into others. Some are very successful. I look at Bob Benny, I look at some others, and again, he's not dealing with tens of thousands of hives, but he's very good at educating his staff on what they should be looking for. That's not easy to do when you're running a very large operation and you're bringing in H2A labor with a language barrier and all the rest of it. So I think you're going to see this push toward hive health from the beginning of the hive, not from a reactive standpoint. And in that spot where the industry goes, I think we're coming together in a nice, what's the word I'm looking for, when the two rivers meet?
Convergence.
Thank you. Convergence.
Yeah. So that's actually, Steve and I have known each other for a few years. We've only beekeeping for a decade, and Steve's been doing it for a little bit longer than us. And we agree with you on all of those points. That, in fact, my apiary, Riverview Road apiary, is based on more local beekeeping for farmers, right? To put it back, the farmers don't have time to control it or do all that beekeeping, but to put it a little bit back on their property and they're in a smaller thing. So, we believe that's something that we kind of preach in our local club. So it's nice to have somebody else not associated with us, right? That's saying the same thing.
Yeah, well, and I'm not the first person that came up with that. I've heard a lot of opinions about where the industry is going. That opinion to me makes the most sense economically. And given the fact that we just took it on the chin as an industry this year, getting back to our hive counts, how we get there is going to be very different than we've done in the past.
Right.
Well, we don't typically talk a lot about politics on our podcast, but you briefly mentioned, I've seen plenty of video of commercial operations working almonds, and he does mention the fact that a lot of that does use a lot of, seasonal labor and stuff that comes in. And if our current administration is really putting a crackdown on that, then 2025, you may have that those industries may really be suffering for a majority of their workforce. And how is that going to impact their ability to perform the services that they've provided in the past? So it's sort of a knock-on of everything else, right? So
yeah. Well, when you get your crystal ball repaired, you just let us know. And
I will.
Moving back to the vaccine, do you have any advice to beekeepers who are considering wanting to use this? Is it perhaps for the hobbyist? You mentioned previously being able to go to your website and find a supplier in the area that is known to buy product from you. Before we got started, we were doing some pregame show and going over some questions. And one of the biggest questions I had was, how do I ask how to ensure that somebody isn't making fraudulent claims of vaccinations? And it sounds like you guys are already there trying to address that on the front end with so why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
So on our website, you can go down two different paths: a purchase path toward getting vaccine, or digital path. And how you can get to a commercial page that will show you the different providers that are selling vaccinated stock. We audit either the provider themselves if they're making their own queens, or we know who is supplying the queens to that entity, like Man Lake or Dayton or whoever. We know who's providing those packages, queens and nukes. And those those apiaries, are getting audited by us on an annual basis, if not biannual, on the vaccination process. And so we review where their vaccination goes, how does it work, and we're not too invasive. We don't want to scare people and tell you that we're going to come and tear your operation apart. But we are confident that you know what you're doing, you're providing good stock, and you're vaccinating correctly. Those folks can go on our website. And if they're on our website, then they've already been pre-approved in that manner. And we continue to approve them every year.
Do you anticipate any problems with availability for vaccine, or is there outside new tariffs or something, are always suddenly going to impact your ability to produce the things that you need? Or
not for us. Everything is done in the USA for right now. Our headquarters is in Athens, Georgia. It's manufactured in the Midwest. We're all contained in that fashion. We don't have necessarily an issue. Now, what could affect us is supply chain when it comes to glass vials and the caps and the wrap that goes around them and all the rest of it. We don't know what we don't know. That's what we found out in the pandemic, right? I have a washing machine, but I don't have a computer chip to put in it, so it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So there may be some hiccups there. We don't anticipate those yet, as we can see, and at least our supply chain people aren't telling me so. Availability for the vaccine, I would have said that I would expect a shortage this year or next, but with this new area of economics we find ourselves in with these huge losses, I think those that are vaccinating stock, the queens, nukes, and packages I keep referring to, I believe they're going to have enough on stock this year to be able. The vaccine's not going to be the issue. I was kind of concerned that demand might outpace supply when it came to purchasing queens. I'm kind of okay with that right now. I think we're going to be okay.
Okay. We've talked a lot about your website. Is that, I guess, the best way, if people want to know more about Dalan Animal Clinic and how to stay updated on what you're working on, is probably going there?
You got it. It's Dalan.com, D-A-L-A-N, as in Nancy.com. You can do all the background search you want to do. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me through that website. My phone number, you might post that in your on your podcast or not, but my phone number is 941-549-4971. My email is ehendrixon@dalananimalhealth.com.
Well, since you're so open to sharing that, I will put that in the little show notes too. So
yeah.
Make it easier for people to find.
And we may have skipped over this at the start of the show, but we'll go back and pick it up now. What is your role with Dalan?
So my official title is a sales manager for North America.
And you're a personal beekeeper?
I am not. I have worked in thousands of I'm the landscaper that has no landscaping at his home, right? And I say that because I actually used to have a landscape company once upon a time, and our home had no landscaping. So I know how the world works in that fashion. But I've worked in thousands of hives. I've been associated with other groups before Dalan. I've worked with bumblebees and honeybees. I travel too much. I also rent. Landlord, may or may not want a beehive on his property. He's told me he doesn't. I could probably argue him into it.
I mean,
my kid, if they are willing to take it on, and my 10-year-old says he's getting excited about it, if I can see some commitment on his side, then we may become a beekeeping family once again.
Hey, that's great.
And I always put a plug in for the club apiary. That your exact situation of living in a rental and not having a place to put a hive. It's the exact reason for you to search out your local community club and see if they have a communal space for you to set a hive, because it's never an excuse not to beekeep if you're interested in doing it.
Or at least help on the weekends. That's what Steve's our apiary manager for our club, so he's always happy to see people come out and get into a hive.
Looking at our list of questions, is there anything else you want to touch on, or are we going to let Everett get back to his evening?
I think we'll let you get back to it. I really appreciate you joining us tonight, Everett. we tried to do this interview over at the North American Honeybee Expo, and I'd forgotten the chip in order to record it. So, and then the area that I had all set aside had like 50 people in it. So it was not going to be a good thing. So yeah, and you've been fantastic to work with and talk with. So I really appreciate you joining here and sharing some of your knowledge.
Appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity. So I'm equally grateful.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Hey, that was awesome interview. Really, really nice to talk to Everett. He's a good guy to speak to about this. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Certainly cleared up a lot of questions I had about the vaccine, and we got some real good information there on how we're actually going to administer that, and because I know for a lot of the hobbyists out there, they were probably wondering, how does this actually work? And so I'm glad to hear. I know we talked about before we had the interview, one of my biggest concerns was, how are we going to combat fraud? We talked about it there. So I'm glad to hear that.
And it sounds like they've got something robust put together.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have, just for clarity, in all my communications to them, they've been really good about getting back in a very short time frame. In fact, of the communications, right, I've really been the one that's been slow in communicating with them. So I'm really happy to see that. Steve and I were talking, we're putting pencil to paper of like how big. So with 50, with a capsule, which is what I've purchased, how do we fully utilize that? How do we correctly fully utilize that? Because that's 50 queens.
50 queens, and we also did a quick note. You may have missed it. He did mention a name in there of who had a video up about how he was applying the treatment, and that was Ian Stepler. And we were like, we don't know who Ian is. And so we looked him up, and turns out that's a Canadian beekeeper. Yeah. So many of you in the beekeeping community probably know the Canadian beekeeper, probably one of the more known half a dozen YouTubers. So definitely encourage everybody that if you have more questions about how one method to apply it to a bulk set of queens, he has a video of how he applied it to a bulk group of 50 queens. So encourage anybody to go out there and check that out. Probably not what we'll do, because that means we have to have 50 queens already at the same time, and our production previously for grafting has not been that aggressive. We've been in the 10 to 15 in a batch kind of range.
Yeah, we might have to step it up this year and see.
We could step it up, or like we were talking about, we could have the opportunity to mix up our candy and then offer that to, make it clear to the area that, like, hey, because as Everett mentioned, that viability of the vaccine once it shows up is only like 2 to 3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah.
So we need to make sure that we get it into the hands of people that are going to actually use it. And, you distribute 5 doses to 10 different people, then there goes your 50 doses.
Sure.
And the cost on that might be around the $15 a dose in that sort of form. So that's also a possibility. So if you're in the Central Illinois area and you're interested in participating and want to get in on that, certainly reach out to us. We'll definitely consider including that as a way to get a small number of doses if you want to go through this process for a couple queens that you raise. Up next, I think we got a question about as we come into the 2025 beekeeping season, we've had several people approach us about this is not going to be their year to do beekeeping anymore.
Yeah, on our Honeybee Hotline, which is natural. Like, it's a natural part of beekeeping.
Every year we have people that, their situation changes. They need to move, relocate, can't take the bees with them. Their life situation changes. You go move and take care of a parent or something, and they're not going to have the time. And so they need to transition out of having hives that they had previously worked for, 1 to several years. And so it presented an interesting opportunity with some questions about how to go about that and what the approach is. I think both of our situations, the individuals were interested in keeping their woodenware because they felt like they might return to it in the future, beekeeping in the future. We were in agreement that you could probably hang on to your boxes. However, you can't really separate a hive that has overwintered. You're not going to effectively separate live bees from the comb they're on in an efficient manner.
Right. It just and the comb isn't there. It isn't going to last.
Yeah.
There's too many things out there that'll want to use it for
wax moth and
for
and
other
mice
things.
and
it's just not. And it gets fragile and it melts and it's just not worth that effort. Frames are, right now they're $4.50 I think per frame. So you're still looking at losing like $90 by those frames, but you're just not going to be able to shake all the bees off into another box and walk away with that. That's kind of what a package is, but it's just you're not.
So I think it's the equivalent of trying to buy. It's basically a nuke, right? And so you're going to show up with your 10 frame box, and you're going to pull the 10 frames out of that beekeeper's box and put them in your box and walk them back to your truck and hand over some cash and drive away and relocate them to your yard.
I would, if you are the buyer for something like that, it would make me more comfortable if a state inspector went and looked at that site first.
Sure, have them inspected. I know for the state of Illinois, they want them inspected if you're moving them across county lines for intact comb. I know a person who bought a hive from another beekeeper that was downsizing, and with the understanding that, quote, it's a full hive and it'll need to be split. And as soon as we got into it, we realized that the two boxes were not actually two boxes. It was a box holding extra shallows that had been allowed to grow into an empty box.
I remember this when you called about this.
Yes, and so it wasn't actually 20 frames. It was like 9, 10 frames. I think there was a total of about 11 frames between the two boxes.
Yeah.
And so that created a whole separate issue of trying to introduce that into the apiary. So if you're going to go buy existing hives from a beekeeper, definitely do it in a season in which you can open the hives and personally work the hives, go through the hives. Hopefully this isn't your first year. You have an idea of what you're looking at when you go through those. Lay hands and eyes on them so you ensure you know what you're buying.
And if you don't, then the seller should be able to walk you through it. And if they're not able to, then you can either reach out to somebody at the club and get a mentor to come take a look maybe. That's a little bit more than mentoring. But you need to have an idea. Somebody needs to wave the.
I definitely would not
hand
recommend
say,
this if this was a beginner and they're looking to get their first hive. This is not the way I would go about doing it.
Yeah, that's not the way I would do that too. That's
at which point, you're a beekeeper for a year or two. I hope you have enough beekeeping experience under your belt to go into that hive and look at that hive and make a call on whether or not that's something you want to invest. What do you think? $200? $250? Probably what you're spending. Our nukes, which are going to be 5 frames, they're going to be $200. They're going to be excellent. We're still taking orders for those up until about
maybe another week or two.
So reach out if you still want one of those. And so if a nuke is $200, that's 5 frames. If you're getting 10 frames or so, they're probably not working all 20 frames of that box.
No, not coming through winter.
$250,
Yeah, $250 is probably where I'd say that's a comfortable
for 2025 prices. If this is sometime in the future, look back on what it was back then.
Well, according to talking to Everett, and he's not the only one that said it, but it sounds like a lot of the commercial beekeepers got hit hard by losses this year, and I feel for him. I've been there. Not as a commercial guy, but being hit hard by losses. And that's just my livelihood doesn't depend on this, and if it did, that would be really heartbreaking.
I also wonder what that's going to look like in the used market if all of a sudden you're going to have several thousand hives,
empty hives,
and people opting to, buy those and expand into those, and then why did they die off? Was it diseases that were a problem, and so it'll be something to pay attention to moving through 2025, and but like you said, I asked the question about availability for the vaccine, and it sounds like it'll be available. So
yeah. The other Honeybee Hotline question we had was about what point when I'm going to change the question a little bit. It's about expanding your apiary, right? I've got an apiary, and I'm moving up, I think, to more hives. How do I expand that? What's the proper process? What do you think the proper process of finding the land to put that stuff on for those new hives?
So we pre-gamed this a little, and I think the proper question there is, when are you ready to move from one apiary site in your backyard to having one or more out yards? Picking up an out yard, if you've got 3 or 4 hives in your backyard and that's all you want to keep in your typical suburban neighborhood setting, that seems about right. Most people have friends and relatives that live in the same physical area, within 15, 20-minute drive. Typically, if it's over about 20 minutes, you're probably not going to get over there every day as a hobbyist, or every week as a hobbyist for your other out yard. But I think if you've got a friend or a neighbor, or especially a family member, a parent, a sister or something, that has another suburban piece of property, well, that's another piece of property that has another 3 or 4 hives, and you're doubling the size of your apiary at that point. And from there, if do you want to have 3 out yards and have to do that 3 times and pack up all your stuff and go to the 3rd yard? That sounds like, I know one of the guys in the club who did that, and it seemed like one of the sites he never got around to visiting, and then that site really suffered because you really need to be in them, every week, especially in the spring. So if you're getting past to the point where you want more than just what 2 sites can hold for 3 or 4 hives, and you're looking to move to that 10 or 20, it's probably a time to look at getting another piece of property. Now, we talked about a couple of different options for that. I think my first choice would probably be trying to find a local farmer. Mm-hmm. You live in the Midwest, you probably are not that far from farm ground, and approaching somebody and being like, hey, can I lease a corner of a field somewhere?
Or they'll probably just let you, if you can talk to them.
Yeah.
Just say, hey, I have some hives I want to put out, and is there an area where I can throw these that won't be a bother to you, and I could put them. You may not have to lease. You may not have to. If you can buy them off with honey, you probably can do that.
That would certainly be the first attempt. However, I think in modern farming days, the good old boys, that would probably work.
Yep.
I think as we've moved into more modern times, they have become more concerned about liability issues.
Sure.
If you drive off into the ditch while you're on my property and then want to sue me, right, or you trip and fall on my property and want to sue me, and I think a lease agreement there makes it clear that gives you a legal distinction that, hey, you're doing what you do on my corner is on you, right, as opposed to just a verbal, oh, yeah, do whatever on a corner over there.
I think I'm just lucky because I've got a farmer that's handshake and
and
we're good. And
but, and that may just be, if you run up against that, you'd be like, hey, listen, we can draw up a lease that can resolve your issues, and maybe it's just $1 or $2.
Sure.
So that there's a monetary exchange to make it all up and
legalized.
legal, But that's probably my first answer. I know the guy in the club I was talking about before, he bought a vacant lot in the city. I think he got it at one of the tax auctions. Mm-hmm. So if you're really in an urban area, and Midwest towns typically have urban urban lots within the area that have had houses that have been torn down and haven't been able to
or the house is still there and you have to pay to tear it down. There's that too.
But usually there's vacant ones, and if you're able to pick one of those up for cheap, several $1,000s, gives you an opportunity to maybe have a little community garden space, even if you're not sharing it, and then set your 4 or 5 hives there.
You probably have to throw a fence up, and it does give you the opportunity too to like plant whatever you want on there too, right? So you can really make it pop, I think, and I think that's totally doable. But I will say 10 hives on a property, as you grow, beekeeping becomes a different hobby. 2 hives is, I think, realistically, anybody could have 2 hives. And after 5 hives is okay. 10 hives is kind of like the cutoff point. Like all of a sudden, there's a lot of work involved in keeping those going.
I would say at 5 hives, you're going to start to notice it going. If you're an average suburban backyard, and you've got them up against the fence line in the backyard, at 5 hives, there's probably enough bee traffic that you're going to notice.
Yeah, the neighbors are
sitting, trying to sit on the back patio.
Yeah.
Like one of my students, she got to the point, she had started with 2 and she'd worked 2 for the first 2 years. And then last year, she caught a swarm and made a split, and it did really well. And she didn't have the horizontals to put them in, so we got a Langstroth, and the Langstroth did great. And so then she went from 2 to 4, and the backyard space, they've got quite a bit of property, but the hives weren't all that much farther away from the house than what a suburban neighborhood yard would have.
Sure.
And she commented that she really felt as if she needed to get rid of some because the amount of bee traffic in front of the hives was impacting a significant portion of the backyard space where if you wanted to be out there playing with the dog or whatever, the bees, like you couldn't be out there and not be mindful that there are bees flying around. Not to say that they were going to be up in your business, but it was noticeable.
Yeah.
And
so where I have hives with people in like smaller yards, I won't go above 2.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that I take care of, and I don't like going above 2. If they insist on going above 2, then I have a real, I don't like turning down business, but I usually will turn it down because it'll quickly turn to, these guys they're bugging me all the time. If I can't walk out my door without feeling like I'm pressured by them, then that's not a good situation either. But I think if you have, so I'm sitting on a 1/4 acre, but I've got empty lots near me, I could probably put 5 hives out there.
Sure.
Without an issue. The neighbors probably would say something to me just because of the neighbors now, but I wouldn't go above 5. But as far as workload goes, your workload changes significantly, I think, at 10.
For workload at 10.
At 10, and it becomes something that is no longer. It is. What do you do in your free time? I work my hives.
It goes from I got an hour or 2 on a weekend. Yeah. On a Saturday or Sunday to you have to dedicate 4 or 5 hours a weekend, every weekend to get through all the hives and to stay on top of it. And you don't get like, when it's starting to get 80 or 90 and it's hot, like an hour in and out, I can still make that happen. But when you're 3 hours in and you're tired of sweating, and you still got like 3 or 4 more hives to go, like that becomes a real mental challenge to be like, I got to go out there.
And you get stung more. As somebody that has that and has done that before, this is when you start to get stung more and you start making mistakes.
You're moving quicker.
Yeah, you're moving quicker. You're starting making mistakes too. Oh, I put that frame in there, and you come back and it's sitting in the back of your car or something along those lines. Or squish a queen. That's when it you really need to pace yourself and really during the summer I have to switch my hours up, so I'm not a morning person. But during the summer, I really have to start my day early so that I'm out and done before the heat is just melting me into puddles. So
I think we got to wrap it up there. I'm showing almost an hour on this clip, and we had a portion there with with
Everett. It's about another half hour.
Yeah, so
maybe an hour. So
we appreciate everybody hanging around. I hope you found the information on the vaccine to be useful. Well, I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about it, because as we get it, we will continue to bring you along and on the journey of bringing this exciting new technology to the apiary that we feel is really going to have a really beneficial impact on our bees as hobbyists. So appreciate everybody hanging in there and listening to yet another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. Thanks.